Well, good morning still to everyone. Welcome to yet another Belgrade Security Forum panel this year. I have to admit that it's a bit strange to sit on this part of the stage. I'm usually the one running backstage and organizing a lot of things, so being a moderator of the panel is a bit different role for me this year, but I'll try to be as good as the moderator that I was the organizer for the past 7 years. Welcome to the panel that will try to re-examine the importance of the strategic investments coming from China. I will have to say that this panel is organized in partnership with the Center for International Private Enterprise, and the topic that we have been discussing for past 12 years was the topic of the rise of the Chinese presence in Serbia. Now the discussion or the implication of this process has become one of the most important issues, both for the Serbian foreign policy, but also for internal developments as well. We have to be aware that Serbia is not a unique case, but it has certainly become one of the most interesting ones, given the scope of the overall cooperation, which includes political partnership, economic cooperation, and cultural exchange. Beijing's Strategic Belt and Road Initiative, formats of bilateral cooperation, like cooperation with Central and Eastern European countries, have positioned China in strategically important sectors throughout the world, including strategic infrastructure, energy sector, and security sector as well. What is often missing from the discussion about the implications that are directly influencing domestic actors, including business sector and local communities. That is why we will try today to shed a light on direct consequences coming from Chinese investments, preferential loan agreements, and political cooperation. What are the challenges and what are the concerns? With that in mind, are there any opportunities coming from cooperation with China? It is my great pleasure to discuss all of these questions and all of these topics with the prominent roster of speakers, which includes Ivana Karaskova, founder and leader of MAP Influence and China Observers in Central and Eastern Europe. Unfortunately, not in person, but still, Ivana, it's great to have you today here. On the other side of this stage is Igor Novakovic, Director of Research of ISAC Fund, and two of us will try to make this panel a little bit more dynamic with our in-person presence right now. Today, I would like to say also hello to Bojan Stanic, Assistant Director, Strategic Analysis and Data at Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Serbia. Bojan, hello. I believe that Bojan is like across the street, but unfortunately he was not able to join us at the Metropole this morning. And with greatest pleasure, I would say hello to the early bird among us here, that's Eric Hons. It's like 5 a.m. at where Eric is right now, so Eric, especially thank you. Eric is Deputy Regional Director of Europe and Eurasia in Center for International Private Enterprise. And the last but not the least is Dimitar Lilko, Research Officer, Wilfred Martens Center for European Studies. It is important for us to raise a couple of questions today, but in order to do that, we have to understand the context of the discussion that we are creating this narrative. And that's why I would like to start actually with Eric. It's not because he is like the early bird among us, but also because he is someone who deeply knows a lot of things about the basic for the whole cooperation, the whole process that we're going to speak today, and that is the topic of corrosive capital. Eric, the first question that I would like to direct to you is, please explain us as best as you can in a limited time amount that you have the concept of corrosive capital. Why is it important to understand it? And what are the implications that can be connected or directed when we are talking about the concept of corrosive capital? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks to the Belgrade Security Forum for having us here today and for the cooperation with the Center for International Private Enterprise. We really appreciate it. I'd like to start off by framing this as CIPER, the Center for National Private Enterprise, is a partner-driven nonprofit organization. And about 5 or 6 years ago, our partners, who are primarily business associations, economic think tanks in emerging democracies around the world, came to us with an issue saying that we're receiving record levels of foreign direct investment, But our members, our small and medium-sized enterprises, are not seeing the result of this. In fact, many of the local domestic businesses don't feel this type of foreign direct investment. We read the headlines, but it's a mismatch. And so about 5 years ago, we began to investigate this problem with partners in the Western Balkans, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, and elsewhere. And what came out of this research was a term that we coined called the corrosive capital. And that is investment that is opaque in nature, that is unaccountable to stakeholders, and really doesn't necessarily have a profit motivation as a typical market-oriented company would be. Last year, 2 years ago rather, COVID time is a bit slippery, we've rolled out this concept called constructive capital. So where we also saw investments in particular emerging democracies that were additive to markets and market competition, that were additive to democratic standards, compliance. And so now what we've developed is this sort of framework that we've worked with called the Corrosive and Constructive Capital Initiative. So it really stems down to this. If I take out a $100 bill and I lay it on the table, Benjamin Franklin is not going to start talking to me about where I should invest my money, who I should partner with, who I should hire, if I should pay attention to some environmental regulation or undermine that regulation. Should I pay my workers fairly? Should I not pay my workers? Benjamin Franklin has no part in that conversation. Who does have part in that conversation is the person who lays that $100 bill there. And so what we're talking about is assigning agency to investors. And so when we have quote unquote good investors, constructive investors coming into a country, we see that spillover effect. In Belgrade, Microsoft has this wonderful research park. And I think that broadly we can agree that has had substantial impact into the overall business operating environment in Belgrade and the wider Western Balkans. So it's had these spillover effects, these positive externalities, not only for Microsoft and the immediate tech space around it, but for other companies that are in that space, entrepreneurship, changing of mindset, changing of culture. Now we see other investments, mineral resources and elsewhere, where environmental regulations are being avoided, responsibility is being avoided, engagement between the investor and the community where they're investing is not really occurring. And at the end of the day, it's not to stop investment, this corrosive capital framework. It's really to provide a lens for the recipient country to take a full look about what the capital is doing, what that investment is doing to their market systems, to their democratic systems, and whether they like that or not. At the end of the day, this is about agency, power, relationships. It's a recipient lens, let's put it that way. So we're not talking anti-China or anti-Russia or anti-US or anti-EU. What we're talking about is Serbia, the Western Balkans need investment. Investment comes in many colors, in many shades. What does Serbia, the Western Balkans, want that investment to do? How do they want it to work for them? And through this corrosive constructive capital lens, we want to get into what type of culture, what type of business environment does the recipient country want to see? Do they want to see an inclusive economy where businesses are engaged and small and medium-sized enterprises are moving up the value chain and more value is being created and retained? Or does that state, be it Serbia or anywhere else around the world, want to keep focusing on extractive industries, lower value add, hit and miss attention to environmental rules and regulations and labor standards? And so at the end of the day, it's not my decision sitting here in Washington. It's not the investor's decision at the end of the day. It's going to be the decision of Serbians, of those that live in the Western Balkans, of those that live in the sovereign states. And it's about giving power back to those people. And so working closely between the private sector, civil society, and government to really decide what type of economy that they want to experience. So
Eric,
thank you, Stefan, for the question.
Thank you, Eric. There is one thing that I would like to highlight from your more than 5 minutes, I have to say that, more than 4 minutes, I have to say that, is the role of the domestic agency, actually. And we can put the discussion about corrosive or constructive capital in the framework of the foreign actors. But really what you have highlighted is actually domestic agency, and I will certainly get back to you on that in the second round of questions. Now I'm turning my head a bit to Ivana and pointing out to Ivana with the idea that maybe we can learn looking across the fence, and maybe we can see what has happened in the other regions maybe a couple of years ago before it started happening in the Western Balkans or in Serbia. Ivana is someone who has vast knowledge about the Chinese influences in Visegrad Group countries. She is leading the whole network that I'm proud to be part of the researchers dealing with the different aspects of the Chinese presence. But in the context of the corrosive or constructive capital, what was the experience of Visegrad groups, or maybe to say Central Europe? Is it positive? Is it negative? Looking from the Western Balkans to those countries, should we be optimistic or should we be cautious? Ivana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be with you, though only virtually. Well, Stefan, that's a great question. But I would like to put one disclaimer out that I'm not going to talk about Hungary. Hungary, it's an outlier. It's a very different country, though we may see some similarities with Serbia, but we can get into that. So when I will be speaking about Central Europe, I mean 3 Visegrad countries. Well, at the very beginning, there was a huge enthusiasm to join the format of cooperation between China and Central and Eastern European countries in 2012. So all the Visegrad countries jumped after that. And the reason for that, of course, was the global financial crisis and the fact that Visegrad countries are economically bound, are part of the supply chains which are leading towards Western Europe. So it was seen as diversification of trade routes. And it was quite... I would say, quite rational strategy from the very beginning. The problem was that China started to be, from the very beginning, portrayed by local politicians as some kind of economic savior after global financial crisis. And the participation in the format was seen as a vehicle for securing Chinese investment and some preferential access for the goods, for the services to the Chinese market. So from the very beginning, we can see 2 problems occurring from the very beginning. One, that there was a huge lack of information on both sides, actually, from China. China was a newcomer to the region of Central and Eastern Europe, and also from the Central Eastern European perspective. They basically thought that this is going to be one another Asian investor, similar to Taiwan, similar to South Korea, similar to Japan. So they were heading for disappointment from very beginning. In order to get a comparative advantage to attract China to the region, and specifically to their country, the politicians decided to praise Chinese Communist Party's rule, to praise China in a big, massive way. Viktor Orbán is quite notorious in Central and Eastern European context, but Czech Republic was quite interesting as well, because the Czech President Zeman said in Chinese television, for example, that the Czech Republic would like to learn how to stabilize Czech society according to the Chinese model, which created a lot of backlash and a lot of very negative responses in the Czech Republic, but also through the whole European Union. So when we fast forward 8 years since 2012 to 2020, 2021, what is the current situation in economy, in political realms, and also in societal area? So Central and Eastern European countries, but Central European countries in specific, are running still economic deficit with China. It's true that trade has risen, but so did the trade imbalance with China to Chinese favor. There were very few greenfield and brownfield investment. Most of the investment came in the form of mergers and acquisitions. When China invested in a very strange portfolio of assets. There were 2 strategic investments into airlines and into media, but otherwise brewery, soccer club, things which are of, let's say, very limited value. Also, it didn't create almost any new jobs. If compared to other investors, the investment which came from China was less than 1% of FDI coming from other all around the globe. So the investment was really minimal. In some cases, it's even smaller, the Taiwanese investment into Central Europe. So no preferential treatment when it comes to Central European goods and services entering Chinese market. So overall, the expectations were not met with reality. Moreover, China's economic presence was coupled with attempts to influence local politicians, politics, and also polities. There are well-documented cases of Chinese growing influence in local academia, attempts to frame China according to Beijing's preferences in local media, influencing media through advertisement, paid supplements, influencing of social networks, hybrid operations, and so on. China also started to employ ex-politicians to defend Chinese interests. In Czech Republic, they employed ex-Minister of Foreign Affairs, ex-Minister of Defense, ex-EU Commissioner, and the list goes on and on. So what we have seen over the past 8 years is increased warnings from local counterintelligence agencies on Chinese corruption, intimidation, threats of retaliation, and also China-backed recruitment. So this all created a huge backlash of local societies. So to sum it up, to stick to my 4 minutes, which is really cruel, I have to say, there is a huge disappointment with China in the economic front, more calls for cautious approach on the political front. And what we can do about that is, as Eric said, and I would like to link it to his final words, it's not to ban everything which is coming from China. It doesn't mean that all kind of investment from China is by nature bad. But we need to be much more smart, more transparent in which areas we are all right with certain actors coming from authoritarian regimes to invest into, and which areas may not be so strategically open for investment from abroad.
Even I think that will be the main motive of our discussion actually today after this initial part, and I'm getting back to you on some important questions regarding the normative legislative framework and especially about screening mechanism in the second part of the discussion. But I would like to turn now to Dimitar for the question that is, let's say, focusing on a specific area of the cooperation between countries that are welcoming China and China as someone who is trying to spread its influence across the globe. Ivan mentioned the strategic sectors where China is present. One of those sectors are like telecommunication or digital development of the new technologies. Maybe in a word that can be described as the Chinese attempt to incorporate digital Silk Road in the wider attempt of the Belt and Road Initiative, digital Silk Road influencing developing countries with helping them or maybe providing assistance in their technological and digital development. So speaking about that area, do you see that as something that for the global society or for the countries that we are talking about, Central and Eastern European countries or maybe Serbia, do you see that as something that our countries can benefit from, or that is something that we should, or not be cautious about when we are creating that context where China is welcomed as a main partner in that area?
Thank you very much and dobar dan. Drago mi je jesam što part vašom fantastičnom forumu. Thank you very much for the invite and for the extremely professional organization of the Belgrade Security Forum. I represent the Martin Center, which is the official think tank of the European People's Party. I'm mindful of the time, so I'll refer to your question, Stefan. It's an extremely important question. We should be cautious. We should be even maybe a bit worried. I'll try to highlight 3 main trends when we talk about China and export of digital technologies globally. And in the following discussion, I'll try to refer the conversation and put it with specific focus on Serbia and Europe, of course. So trend number 1, when we talk about digital in China. The People's Republic of China is the global leader in the export of advanced artificial intelligence surveillance technology. A mix of Chinese companies, there are Huawei, ZTE, and Hikvision. These three companies are supplying surveillance technologies in at least 70 countries, 70 countries. These countries are mostly in Asia, Europe, and Africa. In some of these countries, these companies have made specific agreements for the exchange of data, very sensitive data, facial recognition data, or biometric data, so the Chinese companies can improve their algorithms, make them really precise, and make sure that they're exporting the best equipment. Some experts are even going that far and saying that this is a new approach by China and certain data colonialism, which we'll see even more in the future. Trend number two, and this is something which has been commented a lot recently. China is also becoming the world's biggest exporter and developer of 5G telecom infrastructure and related digital services. If we look at the number of patents submitted by the Chinese in the last few years, we can see that they're surpassing the US, South Korea, and a couple of European companies. And the same goes for Chinese overambition when it comes to technical standards on 5G on the global level. For example, the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, which is part of the United Nations framework, is dominated by Chinese proposals on 5G. Now, there is nothing wrong with competition and innovation on digital infrastructure, 5G, you name it. But there are serious concerns that the export of Chinese telecom infrastructure is not only about business. And this is why, Stefan, we need to be concerned. Many of you are aware of the cybersecurity debate on 5G and the risk of using Chinese vendors. There is much talk about potential backdoors in 5G. I disagree. This is not a backdoor vulnerability. We're talking about the front door vulnerability. Because even if you make sure that the hardware, the 5G hardware is secure and safe, this type of technology requires constant software updates. This technology communicates back and forth constantly with Beijing, with other Chinese cities for upgrades. So even though if we manage to ensure that the hardware is secure, we don't know if the software is compromised when we talk about 5G. And another extremely worrying thing is that Chinese companies exporting these technologies are indirectly under the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. There is a fantastic report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which found that there are at least 300 Communist Party branches within Huawei. And not to speak of the fact that the specific national security law of China obliges companies to cooperate and even transfer data if they're asked to do it. Trend number three, and here I'll close my opening statement. The same Chinese companies, which are the biggest exporters of AI surveillance and 5G, the same 2 or 3 companies, they're also the most ambitious ones who are exporting smart cities or safe cities technology across the world. They're exporting surveillance cameras, facial recognition, car, license plate recognition software, crowd monitoring, data centers even. Huawei has been proud that more than 100 of cities globally are taking part of these smart surveillance projects. Now, the interesting thing is that these partnerships happen on the local or municipal level. Mayors or local councils form partnerships with Huawei in order to increase security in their cities, better traffic management, better energy management. Who doesn't want more security in the cities, right? We've seen certain projects, such projects in Malta and Italy, and I think it also, these projects became famous, especially in Belgrade and the city of Kragujevac in Serbia. And here, a couple of final words and I close. These partnerships on smart cities and safe cities, they're happening across Europe, but they're raising more and more concerns about transfer of data and the hidden political ambitions of China behind these exports. This is becoming a strategic choice, a matter of national security. And I like to give the comparison that you're basically building the next generation digital backbone of your country. So these decisions, who you import from, who you cooperate with, these decisions have extremely important implications for your political, economic, and national security perspective. I'll stop here and I'll be happy to discuss further details and relay this conversation about Serbia 5G in more detail. Thank you very much.
Dimitar, thank you. And I think that you have raised several important points for the Serbian case as well, coming from the 5G. safe city especially, but I'm looking forward to challenging you a little bit on the smart city solutions, because while there are a lot of reasons to be concerned or to be cautious when we are speaking about safe cities, I honestly believe that smart cities are not really that, let's say, big of a deal like the safe cities, but let's put that for the second part of the discussion. Now, we have heard a bit about the context, different areas, different ways of cooperation. We have heard about corrosive, constructive capital, and strategic sectors. This is now I'm turning to Igor and asking him, so what's going on in Serbia? And I don't want to have the overview that we probably all quite are aware of, but let's pinpoint a couple of sectors. Let's pinpoint a couple of entrance points of the Chinese investments, either constructive or corrosive, but let's focus on pinpointing right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak here. And I will try to relate to things that were to some of the things that were already outlined by my predecessors in this panel. So regarding the areas where China is engaged in Serbia, we have several of them. First is infrastructure, then we have energy, mining and smelting, military, high-tech and commercial projects. And I will try to pinpoint some of the challenges that come, and some of the challenges are intersecting. So not necessarily that there is one challenge exclusively related to one area. First challenge is, of course, and we have seen it just recently in our immediate neighborhood, but it's also a worldwide experience, it's a debt trap. So basically, Serbia at this moment, some even said that we obliged ourselves that we will implement projects of worth of 7 billion euros.
It was big.
Coming predominantly from Chinese loans. So we should think about that, especially in relation to the rampant inflation and the possibility that main central banks in the world could raise interest rates. Then there is a political problem with loans, because what we are witnessing right now is an ongoing polarization between the West and China. Situation around Taiwan is not really rosy, so we could find ourselves in the middle of some clash between the West and China. Then what about the rules? So our domestic rules and also the EU rules that we should follow, because we are an EU aspirant country. And in many ways, projects that are implemented in cooperation with China go around these rules. We are talking about procurement, transparency, etc. Then we have environmental issues, of course, and which become more and more important with the EU Green Deal and the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. We signed that agenda within the Berlin process, so this is certainly a challenge. Now, something that Dimitar said regarding privacy. What about GDPR sensitive data in the hands of Chinese? And then finally, what about the spillover effect? So there are several sub-issues within this. First, do we do a cost-benefit analysis about the projects that we do with Chinese? Then the second issue, what are the benefits coming from these loans and engagement of Chinese companies for our own domestic companies? To which, to which extent they do participate in these projects? Then how challenging some of these projects are for the local communities and local businesses? Environment, jobs, etc. And finally, what about the technology transfer? So I think that we should aspire in all the projects that we do with the foreign partners to have more and more of technology transfer that would actually empower our own subjects to do business in a better way. And yeah, I would end here with my initial statement, and then we can continue on.
Thank you, Igor. I think that this really sums up the entrance points and what were the questions that have been raised during the past 12 years, because some of the projects that came like in 2009 have already been finalized. You have mentioned the 7 billion overall number. That is something that will tie China to Serbia and Serbian sectors, both financial and other parts of the economy for next 20, 25 years. So the framework that we are discussing, China and Chinese presence, is long-term framework. It's not something that will disappear in matter of months or matter of years. So there is a question that can be posed: how can we use actually China? How can we be the best possible domestic actors to use China for our benefit, for the benefit of our overall economy, and for the benefit of our small businesses? And speaking about the business sector, speaking about the business community in Serbia, there is a representative institution that we have in our national framework. And that institution is here represented by Bojan Stanic. I will not ask you to answer to the challenges that have been raised, because I really want to end this first round of questions with a specific question directed to you. What are the good things that we can show, say, right now, coming from, in this case, Chinese investments, coming from the cooperation between Chinese businesses and Serbian businesses here in Serbia, and maybe what are the chances and opportunities for the Serbian businesses, let's say, when it comes to the foreign trade or export. I will not focus on the challenges right now. We can tackle that in the second round of questions maybe, but Bojan, I'm looking forward to hearing your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Stefan. Greetings to everyone. It's a pleasure to participate on the Belgrade Security Forum. And if you allow me just a few words as an introduction. First of all, I would like to highlight that China is the second largest economy in the world with expansive growth rates. China was the only major economy that avoided a recession in 2020. So the GDP growth rate was 2.3%. And this year it will be 8%. And thanks to its economic potential as the most populous country in the world, China is one of the key drivers of global GDP growth. For example, if you take a look at the World Economic reports published by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, for example, you will see that the global economic growth rates are highly dependent on the Chinese output. So China has a tremendous production capacity. It is the biggest exporter. And almost every country in the world, including Serbia, has China as one of the main foreign trade partners. Thanks to the increasing purchasing power in China, and further economic growth of that country will be based on the personal consumption increase of its citizens. And that's why China, in my opinion, cannot be isolated if we want to see firm growth rates on the global scale in the years and decades to come. So talking about the Republic of Serbia, it's important to know that we are the leading economy in the Western Balkans, and our responsibility is even bigger to create, let's say, a regional common market and to boost economic activity in the region. Just to mention that the growth rate this year in Serbia will be 6.5%, which is quite good result compared to the 1% GDP contraction in 2020. And thanks to our macroeconomic stability, relatively good credit rating, which is BB+, according to Standard & Poor's and Fitch ratings. Also government support to investors and geographic locations and a set of free trade agreements. Serbia is the most attractive investment destination here in the region. In 2020, we have attracted 3 billion of euros of investments, and this year will be even more, 3.5 billion, according to the estimate of the National Bank of Serbia. Serbia is in the process of reindustrialization, and our GDP growth is based on export, and we are trying to attract more and more investments, especially those that are of higher value added. Many investments from China so far were oriented toward base metals production and automotive sectors, and of course chemical industry. If we take a look at the Lingo tire company that will start production next year here in Serbia. So why China is important for the Serbia's economy? In the last 5 years, more than 1.5 billion of euro of foreign direct investments from China have been attracted to Serbia. Also, main investors here are the Zijin, HBIS Group, Linglong Tire, as I already mentioned, and several companies within the automotive sector. More than 20,000 of employees work for the Chinese company here in Serbia. We already mentioned Belt and Road Initiative, and Serbia is, let's say, one of the main parts in Southeast Europe within that global project. Also, transfer of technologies has a great potential here in Serbia, coming from the Chinese companies. China is a creditor, as we already mentioned, Igor mentioned, for many infrastructural projects initiated by the government. I mean, building roads, railways, energy potential, and so on. And at the end of my introduction, let's say, statement, I would like to say that European Union is our main trading partner and the largest investor here in Serbia and also in the Western Balkans. But since becoming the EU member state is our main economic and political goal declared by the government, but we are happy to say that there is a room for investments from all around the world in Serbia, especially from non-EU countries like United States, United Kingdom, China, Russia, Emirates, and Turkey, and so on. So that's for this introductory.
Okay, I will ask the panel to allow me to misuse the position as a moderator for a second and to get back to Bojan immediately, because we have heard about the cumulative numbers and the overall representation of the Chinese and Serbian cooperation in the field of the economy, but let me reiterate the question regarding the Serbian businesses. So when we have, for example, investments in Bor when it comes to Zijin, or in Smederevo when it comes to the steel, both of those investments have been, to put it mildly, export-driven. So basically, we have production coming from both of those factories now owned by Chinese, so basically being Chinese companies that are exporting. For example, copper has become the #1 export good from Serbia to China since 2019. That is not bad per se, but there is a question of the overall benefit of those kind of investments. Okay, there is taxation, there are employees who are working in those factories, but is there any level of cooperation between small and medium enterprises in Serbia with those large systems? We have heard rumors or even seen evidences that, okay, there are like 500 people from Serbia working in construction of Zrenjanin factory, but more than 1,000 of the Chinese workers working there. As we have had a chance to speak with the people from Zrenjanin, no one is there inherently against the investment coming from China. But there is a real question of the spillover effect and the real benefit both for the citizens, for the local communities, and for the local businesses. Can you maybe address that question regarding spillover effect and the real benefits for the Serbian businesses and Serbian local communities?
Thank you, Stefan, for that question. I will use an example of steel plant in Smederevo, which is owned by HBIS Group. And so it is important to know that almost 50% of all suppliers for that steel plant are local companies, Serbian companies. Also, for example, in the Bor mining complex owned by Zijin, average salary, for example, is 820 euros, which is compared to the Republic average, which is 550. Also, there is a new project in steel plant Smederevo regarding the environmental protection known as the new agglomeration. So there are many things that, let's say, will improve the position of Chinese investments. So we believe that after these investments in base metals and, let's say, manufacturing, companies from IT sector and from other services sector will also come to Serbia, as it is a thing in many Western European countries. I will try to highlight that many Chinese investors are coming to United Kingdom, France, and Germany, and Scandinavia. And for example, investments from China to Germany are higher than the investments Chinese investors in Russia and India. And if you allow me just to use this, let's say, second opportunity to highlight that all the large investments coming to Serbia are strictly monitored by the government. And I believe that the government knows how to be in line with its national political, social, and environmental agenda. So that's also important that we always highlight the essence of environmental protection and accepting the best standards and practice to reduce pollution and carbon emission, which should be in line also with the European Green Deal, and Serbia is also part of that concept.
Thank you, Bojan. You actually gave me a perfect segue to something that I wanted to ask Ivana after her first remarks. And speaking about monitoring of the Chinese or any other investments, can you tell us a little bit more about screening mechanism that has been introduced in the European Union countries, I believe in 2019 as obligatory for the EU member states? Is it working? Can that be a useful tool to addressing some of the challenges that Igor mentioned when it comes to Serbia? And when Bojan says that government is closely monitoring, I do not doubt that for a second, but I would like to know more about the other ways of monitoring, about the level of transparency, because that is something that has been pointed out by the researcher and the expert that has been lacking a bit in our country.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, if you allow me to frame it a little bit broader, I would like to say that it's not that China would be a super smart international player, that it would have some kind of grand strategy. It is more the fact that we are lacking information and we are not doing the homework when we are approaching Chinese investment. So it's vice versa. What Chinese investment actually did was that it only highlighted the loopholes we have in our system. And it's not only connected to investment per se, it's connected to all kinds of other influence in academia, influence in media, and so on. And there are also two interconnected issues connected to that. One is that we are lacking regulatory mechanisms, and the other one is that we actually do have regulatory mechanisms, as Mr. Stanic said, but we choose not to use them from time to time when it comes to Chinese investment, because it's strategic, because we like Chinese investment, and because we just have different agenda for approaching different investors. Regarding the investment screening mechanism, as I said, it's just one of the tools. It's trying to patch up one small hole in the system, which is not officially directed to China. It's not mentioning China almost anywhere, so it could be used to any kind of foreign investment entering European Union, being it from the United States, being from Japan, being from Russia, Turkey, you name it. What the mechanism does on EU level is that it only provides some kind of information sharing scheme. So from the point where nobody knew who is investing where in the European Union to the situation where the countries are required to fill in, let's say, Excel tables on a regular basis and send it to all the other member states, including European Commission. There is no way how the other countries can actually say to, let's say, Hungary or the Czech Republic that this Chinese, let's say, investment should be banned, should not be allowed. It's still the power of the member state to do that, of the government of the member state. Of course, there could be a peer pressure, there could be other ways how to work with it, with the system, but it's more or less just an information sharing mechanism. What the investment screening also did is that it incentivized other stakeholders, member states, to implement the investment screening into their own national legislation. And here it comes with the sticks as well. So you as the government can actually block, according to your own national legislation, unwanted investment into strategic sectors. And the EU's investment mechanism tells you exactly in which areas should be considered strategic. We as NGO, which is working on Map Influence project, looking at Chinese but also Russian influence in Central Europe, we advocated for media to be included into EU investment screening. And we were successful because we ran a research which showed quite specifically what happens when China invests into local media, that all the neutral and as well as negative reports on China basically disappears from local media from the day one, from the day the contract is signed. So media were actually included, and that also led to have it in all new investment screening regulations which were adopted in the European Union by the member states. So that's one possible way how to approach it. But as I said, it's just one mechanism, and it's not sufficient to have just investment screening, because one thing is to have it, the other one is actually to force the government and the government bodies to use it. There may be periods of time before elections when it would not be in government's interest or in party interest to actually block Chinese investment in, let's say, airlines, let's say...
I'll stop you there, Ivana, because you gave me the perfect segue to the question that I wanted to point to Eric. And that is actually going back to the domestic agency, going back to having tools even in your own national framework and just not using it. I don't know the level of, or I don't know the level of your familiarity with Serbian legislative framework, but let's say that we have the mechanisms that Bojan mentioned, and let's say that there is a situation where those mechanisms are maybe not in Serbia, maybe some other countries not used. What are the steps of advocating or asking or requesting of the national actors, domestic actors, just to do what they are supposed to do, let's say implement laws?
Yeah, so this is a great opportunity, Ivana. We didn't coordinate this, so Ivana, those holes that you talk about are governance gaps when we talk about them from SITE's perspective, and those governance gaps create opportunity for corruption to occur, for this discretion. To get to your question, Stefan, this is where business and civil society can really work together, right? So, and I'm talking about business as a whole, not business as an individual entity. What business wants generally is rule of law, a fair application, and a level playing field for the various business interests here. And civil society generally wants to have transparency, accountability, and enforcement of existing legislation. And here's an opportunity for two partners to work together from the business sector and from the civil society in Belgrade and elsewhere to really make sure and hold government agencies accountable for the laws and regulations that are already in existence on the books. Investment screening, as Ivana said, is one tool in the toolbox, but not the only tool. Serbia has a robust regulatory regime modeled after, much of it modeled after the EU, but it needs to be applied. So again, this could involve advocacy for improved administrative competencies and resources to support various ministerial functions to carry out those things that are already on the books, with coordination from the private sector and civil society to form that three-legged stool on which you can create a sustainable, inclusive economy. But again, if the laws are there and they're not being enforced, is it really a law? Or is it really a regulation? And this is, again, where civil society and business can step in and make sure that they're being applied equitably and fairly.
Well, let's hope that this discussion is one step towards doing exactly that. And I would like to continue the conversation about domestic actors with Dimitar and reiterate what I said before of challenging him about the smart city solutions and where the challenge is coming from. The challenge is that smart cities are seen as the main way of exporting tech authoritarianism from China to the countries where the China is present. In my opinion, it's just the tool for digital local self-governments governing. But please prove me wrong, Dimitar, if you can.
Now the question you're great to challenge this premise. When it comes to smart cities, you're absolutely right. I'm not a technophobe. I'm not saying let's stop progress, let's not implement this technology. We see this development in many countries globally. The problem here is the standards. What kind of standards are applied? How secure is this data? And if we are getting this technology and this investment, are we certain about it? I always like to give the example of the car industry back in the days. A decade ago, China wanted to export Chinese cheaper cars to Europe. And basically, our standard setting body said, okay, but these cars do not go through our safety requirements. They crash, they're unsecure, even though they're cheaper. So let's make sure that this technology is reliable and we can then adapt it and use it. But let's make sure that we have the standards for it and that we can actually trust it.
Okay. You gave a pretty good argument, and I agree with what you said regarding the standards and how we are respecting it. Before I open the floor to the questions, I would like to finish with one question pointed to Igor, just to give the full picture. We have spoken about the China and how Serbian legislative framework is treating China and Chinese companies, and what is the spillover effect of the Chinese companies. Is there an actual difference between investments coming from China and investments coming from other countries, either from the EU countries, USA, Russia, or is it actually all up to us how we are setting standards, how we are respecting standards, and what is our main political interest at the moment?
Well, to a large extent, I guess it's up to us. But if we are talking about investments, and strictly about investments, so not loans and infrastructure projects and other projects that come out of it, which are implemented by Chinese companies. So if we talk about investments, the problem there is about companies that are coming here to implement that investment. In many ways, when we talk about companies, about Western companies, or first and foremost, we know what is the ownership structure, who governs, who runs those companies, who are responsible persons, and we have tools at our disposal to influence their business making here in Serbia, not just by enforcing our laws or raising domestic attention, but also we can go there to the country of their origin and raise some questions. There are tools and mechanisms at our disposal to do that. Regarding Chinese companies that are coming here, in most cases, and we heard that from our colleagues here in the panel, the problem is, first and foremost, the informal or formal influence of the Communist Party of China, and second of all, to which extent, for example, some companies that are labeled as private are indeed private. So in many ways, in many cases, the key portion of shares within those companies is being held by the state, or the governing shares, let's put it like that.
Yeah, and there is also a question of, let's say, we implement the standard competitive procedures to, let's say, the tender procedures for purchase or merger and acquisition. What is the comparative advantage of the Chinese companies? Well, if it is a state-owned company or private company with the close ties to the state, they can always just push it a little bit more, like we had in a situation in Croatia and Pelješac Bridge. Okay, it was the European money, but still a really similar case with the best possible offer because it's being backed by the government.
I'm not claiming that these companies that are operating in Serbia are dangerous per se. What I'm trying to say is when there is a connection of politics with business making, there is always a danger of weaponization of business making on behalf of the interest of the state from where the investment came. So,
great conclusion. Eric, you want to follow up on this?
Yeah, so my background is in law, right? And so as the West, let's just call us the West here, you know, in the Western Balkans and Europe and America and Japan and South Korea, we have this development of corporate law over the past 100 years, which places a barrier between the state and business. Now, if you talk to Chinese lawyers and look at the Chinese corporate governance codes, which were developed 5-7 years ago, it's a very different approach. So I think Igor is exactly right when he says, you know, we need to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And, you know, if the Chinese, we're talking about Chinese investment here and Chinese companies, if they're operating out of a different legal system, a different legal heritage, you know, can that comport with what we have developed in our institutional heritage and our institutional frameworks in the West over the past 100 years of our establishment of corporate law, limited liability, and all the privileges and benefits that those include. Thank you for the intervention.
No, thank you, Eric. I would like to use the opportunity to open the floor now if there are any questions. I see one question. Okay, we can take it right now.
Thank you, Stefan, and thanks to all the panelists for this really interesting discussion. My name is Luka Šterić. I'm the researcher at the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. We had another discussion yesterday about this very similar topic of Chinese influence. So I have a question for Mr. Honts first. We have discussed yesterday in great length and today as well about the corrosive capital of Chinese projects, Chinese investments in Serbia, with them being conducted by the non-transparent agreements, avoiding environmental standards, etc., which is all very true. But then we have an example in Serbia, for example, of Rio Tinto project, which is being implemented by Western companies of lithium exploration in Western Serbia, and it ticks most of the boxes in the same way. So my question to you is, does this type of projects then delegitimize this critique of Chinese investments and gives the proponents of Chinese investments the right to say, you know, it's all the same. It just depends where the capital comes from. There's no other alternative than to have this kind of capital investments. And the follow-up question, just for all the other panelists, based on a very important point that Stefan has made about the domestic agency. We all often talk about the malign influence from China, and as much as it's true that China is giving the political, economic, and technological means to this type of regime to have this type of influence, would it be more helpful maybe to focus on the type of regime that is giving a fertile ground to this kind of influence than focusing on China per se? Because there are Chinese influences and Chinese investments in other countries, so for example Germany or whatever, where you don't see this kind of malign influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Luka. I propose to Eric to answer the first question, and if he wants to refer to the second one as well. And I would direct the second question first to Igor, and then to see if there is someone else of the panelists who wants to address it as well. Eric.
Yeah, so the issue of Rio Tinto is a real one, and you know, I think that the issues experienced in Bor by Serbia and by the Serbian civil society are real and relevant, and have raised this additional attention to this potential investment by Rio Tinto. Now, from my understanding, this is still in the early and exploratory phases, which is great. I mean, it should be examined. It should be again, coming back to corrosive capital. It's not meant to be an anti-China metric. It's meant to be a pro-investment, in this case, Serbia lens by which, civil society, citizens, business can hold themselves and hold the government accountable for these investments and into this process. So, by all means, Rio Tinto should comply fully with the laws and established by Serbia and be held accountable, just as every other investor should be in Serbia. I would say that they're two different investments, and I would caution. I have a lot of experience in working in Ukraine, and I'm sure that there's a lot of черный PR, the black PR out there about various investments. And be very cautious when evaluating where you're getting your resources from or where you're getting your media from. But overall, again, to take a step back and truly kind of measure this through a lens by which it benefits the most Serbians and benefits Serbia in the best way possible.
Thank you, Eric. And the reason why I have directed the second question to Igor, but I would like to hear anyone else from the panelists as well, is that when we are talking about ourselves and our issues, I like to hear our voices first. And then if there is additional comments being made, then we can include them as well. But I would like to hear your opinion on the second question that Luke asked.
Well, regarding the domestic agency and...
Yeah, focusing on ourselves first and foremost.
And what we could do is actually, first and foremost, I'm not really sure that we have a debate. We have this, for a number of years, this sacred cow for indirect investments, and that any investment is a good investment. And I'm not claiming that just this current ruling elite is responsible for that. I mean, it's the whole narrative that we have since 2000. And I think that it's finally, the time has finally come for all of us to start the debate about the usefulness of some of the projects that are coming to Serbia. What are the spillover effects? What are the consequences for the domestic laws and regulations? What are, in essence, what are our interests? And I'm not sure that we have that. In many ways, for example, big investments that come to Serbia are even being implemented without real consultation with the locals, where that investment is heading. For example, I heard a number of people from Zrenjanin, local representatives of local businesses, that actually have something to say about the Linglong investment. Also regarding, I think that the whole situation, for example, with Rio Tinto is precisely the fact that we did not have this debate. I mean, I know that Rio Tinto was trying something to do on the ground with the locals, but now the debate is, we have the debate, and the debate is at the national level with a lot of information that should be discussed. And what we have there is actually not really a real responsiveness coming from the company itself.
Thank you. Is there someone from the panel who wants to? Dimitar, the stage is yours.
Yeah, very quick intervention on the question of agency. This was raised by Eric in his opening introduction, and also great question from the audience. No country should be criticized about how it really, that it wants to improve the life of its citizens or draw investment. The worst you can have is people from Berlin, Washington, or Brussels, lecturing locals on what to do with their money. It's a sovereign country. But when it comes to Chinese investment, we see a clear pattern. It was raised just now. First of all, about labor. Many of these projects, Belt and Road projects, investments, Chinese workers are also sent to the host country to implement these projects. So not even the local community is engaged. Not to talk about labor standards as well, which is a problem. But the problem of debt wasn't really also mentioned in this panel. And I think it's a huge potential problem as well. When we talk about the Belt and Road initiative, when we talk about the 17+ initiative, I mean, look at Montenegro, Crna Gora, a country you're very well linked with in terms of history. The highway to nowhere, which was supposed to link Serbia with Montenegro, right? Montenegro had to embarrass itself and ask for support from the EU to repay its debt. So this is, I think, something we should be really, really careful about. Last quick point on the note that we don't see this influence in Europe. I unfortunately disagree. We actually see this in Germany. We see it in indirect ways. We see it more subtly. Just look at the German car industry and its dependence on the Chinese market. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dimitar. I agree about the, let's say, danger coming from the higher level of loans and financial agreements with Chinese. But when we are speaking about Serbia, or when we are speaking about Montenegro and the highway, it's also the question of necessity. Necessity of the infrastructure development in our countries, necessity of economic development. It is not a highway from nowhere to nowhere. It's a really catchy phrase, but it really goes, and it should be from north part of the country, and it will connect it with the seaside, it will connect it with the Serbian border. It may not be economically and financially sustainable in the long term, but it will benefit, the Montenegrin citizens will benefit from it, and hopefully they will be in the future smart enough and find the ways to deal with the rising debt and the influence that it has to their public finances. I see that you want to follow back, so please do.
You're absolutely right. Just to know that it will be finished with European funding, most likely.
It would be probably the best case scenario for their government as well. Are there additional questions? That's a lot of hands. Because we have like 7 more minutes, I'll collect all of the three questions. Please introduce yourself and address question to someone in the panel.
Okay, hello to everyone. My name is Bojana Milutinovic and I'm a consultant in oil and gas and also in chemical industry in Serbia. I have three questions, one leading to another.
Pick one.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
So this one is very blunt, but I would like a direct answer, maybe from Bojan and Igor. Why is Serbia so attractive to Chinese investors in comparison to other countries of European Union? So what regulations are so favorable, or lack of regulations is so favorable to Chinese investors? Then what kind of industries are finding Serbia so interesting? And I would kindly ask you to explain how do we ensure early compliance to environmental standards, health and safety standards, and ensuring basic human dignity. And finally, what can we do to ensure that investments are really desirable from all perspectives? So not just the money, but from all perspectives, as the question before mine was already asked. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Bojana. I saw a hand back there, so let's take that question.
Thank you. My name is Aleksandar Mijailovic. I'm head of the legal team of the Together for Serbia political party. My question is actually similar to Bojana's question, and it's directed to Bojan Stanic. So you mentioned that Serbia have certain benefits from Chinese investments, but at the same time we see that China is exporting their dirty technologies, polluting technologies, and the biggest investments in Serbia are those dirty technologies. At the same time, we see reports that in cities where they came, like Bor, Majdanpek, Smederevo, the levels of pollution are actually increasing. So the question is, do we really need those kind of investments, those kinds of industries? And if you say yes, that we do need them, do Serbia have strength to actually punish those who pollute over the limits? Thank you.
And let's make an annual seminar of Foundation BFP hat trick with Nenad in the first row. There is a mic needed here, please.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you to all the panelists for the great presentations. I'm Nenad Stekic from the Research Associate at the Institute of International Politics and Economics here in Belgrade. My question is addressed to Madam Karaskova. It actually concerns of something I'm quite sure that is our near future, I would say, and this is the Chinese investment into the small and medium enterprises in Europe. And my question is also related maybe to Eric. In Serbia, we are witnessing quite now that China is still investing into the strategic sectors and a huge, very huge infrastructural project, but not in SMEs at the very moment. I would like to know your opinion about the potential influence, the increased or decreased influence in Central and Eastern Europe, if that is a case now, or if it is not a case now, what is your opinion about the potential development of Chinese investments into the SME sector in the EU? Because Madam Karaskova also told that the European Union did not do its homework when it comes to the strategic areas in which we should respond, or Europe at least should respond to the Chinese presence here. So could the European Union has a more coherent strategy agenda in this area? Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have 3 questions, but let's say that we have 2 questions, one for Bojan regarding the overall benefit of the investment regulations, early compliance with environmental standards, and I believe that Bojan is more than capable to give us the elevator pitch answer, and I would also ask Ivana and Eric as well, because I don't want to misuse my position as an organizer to prolong this panel more than it was supposed to. So, Bojan, please go.
So thank you, Stefan. So I will try to be brief. So Chinese investments are mainly oriented toward the base metals production and manufacturing, which is quite logical since the country is making economic breakthrough in Europe. And it is also visible, I would say, that the main investments in the Southeast Europe are located in the countries that are on the path of the Belt and Road Initiative, like Serbia, Greece, and Hungary. We know that mining and base metal production are not clean industries, but they are also strategic industries, essential for development of manufacturing and infrastructural projects, since I already mentioned that Serbia is in the process of reindustrialization. Talking about dignity of labor force, about environmental protection, all those are questions for the government. But I believe that the government has mechanisms to be in line with all the strategic, let's say, agenda in the country. And also, what I would like to mention is that, as we already know, the economic outlook depends on economic relation between the economic superpowers. In the first row between the United States and China in this case. But from my personal point of view, I would say this like a Bojan Stanic. Although we would like to become the EU member state, this process is unfortunately too slow and uncertain. But what we really do not want to be is to be the hostages of the economic standoff between the West and China. And why we also are attractive for the Chinese investment, because I already mentioned a set of free trade agreements, but also the fact that we are still not the EU member state.
Thank you, Bojan. So elevator pitch, but we have like 4 floors, so even shorter. Ivana, you can go first because the participant addressed the question to you first.
Okay, I will try to squeeze it into 30 seconds, which is a very difficult task. So Chinese investment to small and medium enterprises in Europe. I don't think China is going to invest en masse. Basically, the development is different. They aim for dual circulation, for being less reliant on international markets, actually. So that goes a little bit against what Mr. Stanic was saying. I think it was Mr. Stanic. Mostly what they would be interested about are still startups, especially tech industry, emerging technologies, and so on. And there is still lack of information and awareness when it comes to startups. They should be theoretically covered by investment screening mechanisms. But as I said, you need the governing body to actually start the screening process in the first place. So there I do see a huge loophole, actually, in this. When it comes to European Union approach towards SMEs, well, I don't see that happening that much. I really do see more of the emphasis put on investment screening as such, because not every member state actually has it. No, not even non-member states have it, but accessing states. And guidance for research centers, which, for example, we are working on for Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Austria. So to make universities and research centers much more aware of the situation, that they may not be actually wanting to have a Chinese investor for a plethora of reasons, which I don't unfortunately have time to elaborate. And in case of the small question on whether I do see increase or decrease of influence of China in European Union, I think that China started to move towards gray zones, towards towards areas which are not in the spotlight. So less on governing parties, opposition parties, more on power diplomacy. So more influence when it comes to cities, counties, smaller regions, and so on. More focusing on media, not only traditional media, but social media. That's something we do see across the continent, and no small country is actually small enough to avoid that. So that's why we do need the watchdogs, such as a number of organizations which are actually participating in Belgrade Security Forum today.
Thank you, Ivana. And we will finish with the, I hope, short answer coming from Eric. Please do.
Yeah, I'll be very brief and I'll talk really fast. So so intellectual property is a target here, obviously, at SMEs and startups. Typically those investments occur and there is some sort of arrangement. I would also kind of point attention to, as Ivan, I think, was alluding to, dual-use technologies. So you have the case of Motor Sich in Ukraine, where there was a very kind of clear quasi-state organization that looked to acquire heavy lift helicopter technology from a privatized entity, which is an SME in Ukraine. So this kind of dual-use technology is another area of concern and should be covered by investment screening, but is not always. So there are specific red flags or cautionary areas where we want to pay attention with those investment screening mechanisms. And I'll stop there because I know we're over time.
Thank you, Eric. That's perfect. I would like to use the opportunity to thank all of the panelists, to thank all the participants for the interesting question. I would like to inform that this discussion does not end here. With the support of the Center for International Private Enterprise, we will continue to speak about the positive or negative consequences of the, in this case, Chinese investments to the Serbian business community. I would be happy and honored to have Bojan and the Chamber of Commerce in the next steps of this conversation. I believe that it is important to have all the angles covered and all of the interested sides represented there. So Bojan, you will be more than welcome together with your institutions. I would like to thank Ivana for saving us for yet another panel, Dimitar and Martin Center for the support to the overall Belgrade Security Forum, and Igor for being brave enough to sit next to me during this really interesting discussions. We are looking to welcoming you in Belgrade next time in person, and have a great day and the rest of the Thursday. That's the conclusion of this panel.